You're standing in a dimly lit corridor beneath St. Peter's Basilica, your footsteps echoing off ancient stone walls that have witnessed more secrets than any building on earth. The air smells like old parchment, candle wax, and centuries of whispered confessions. In your hands you hold a key, not just any key, but one that unlocks the most guarded archives in human history. Welcome to the Vatican's secret archives. Well, actually, they're called the Vatican Apostolic Archives now. They changed the name in 2019 because secret was giving people the wrong idea. But here's the thing, changing the name doesn't change what's hidden inside these walls. Today you're about to discover truths so shocking that the Catholic Church has kept them locked away for centuries. Some of these revelations will make you question everything you thought you knew about history, power, and the price of keeping the world's darkest secrets. But before we unlock these forbidden vaults, let me ask you something. Are you ready to learn what happens when absolute power meets human weakness? Because once you know these secrets, you can never unknow them. You descend deeper into the archives, your torch casting dancing shadows on walls lined with documents that span over 1,000 years. The silence is so complete you can hear your own heartbeat. This isn't just a library, it's a mausoleum of truth, where inconvenient facts come to die. Picture this. You're in 1633, and you're Galileo Galilei. You wake up in a cold cell, your joints aching from the damp Roman winter. Today you'll stand trial for daring to suggest that the earth revolves around the sun. The irony. The men condemning you know you're right. The Vatican's own astronomers have confirmed your observations. But acknowledging scientific truth would undermine the Church's authority over reality itself. You dress carefully in your finest clothes. After all, you're about to be destroyed by some of the most powerful men in Europe, and you want to look dignified while it happens. As you enter the courtroom, you see Cardinal Bellarmine's cold eyes studying you like a specimen. He holds in his hands documents that could exonerate you, but he won't use them. The truth is dangerous to those who profit from lies. The trial transcripts hidden for centuries in these very archives reveal something chilling. The inquisitors didn't care about theological truth. They cared about control. In their private correspondence, yes, we have those letters now, they discuss Galileo not as a heretic but as a threat to their political power. One cardinal writes to another, "If we allow this old man to speak freely about the heavens, what's to stop the common people from speaking freely about earthly matters? Better to silence one philosopher than risk losing our grip on millions of souls." You can almost smell the fear in those ancient words, can't you? The terror of powerful men realizing that truth has a way of spreading like wildfire. Now imagine you're Cardinal Robert Bellarmine himself. You're intelligent enough to understand that Galileo's mathematics are correct. But you're also shrewd enough to know that admitting this publicly would create a crisis of faith that could topple government. You sleep poorly, knowing you're forcing a man to deny what he's seen with his own eyes. But you tell yourself it's for the greater good. This is the first dark secret of the Vatican Archives. They contain proof that the Church has always known the difference between truth and useful fiction. The question isn't whether Church leaders believed their own teachings. It's whether they cared more about truth than power. You move deeper into the archives and your fingers brush against a leather-bound ledger that feels warm to the touch, as if it's still burning with shame. The pages crackle as you open them, revealing neat columns of numbers that document one of the most cynical schemes in human history. You're now Pope Leo X in 1515, waking up in the Apostolic Palace to a problem that keeps you awake at night. You're broke. Not just personally broke, the entire papal state is hemorrhaging money. St. Peter's Basilica isn't going to build itself. And those Renaissance artists don't work for prayers and good intentions. So what do? You reach for your quill and draft a letter that will echo through history as one of the most shameless money-making schemes ever devised. You're about to sell salvation itself. The document you're looking at is Leo Dix's actual authorization for the sale of indulgences. Essentially get-out-of-hell-free cards for the right price. But here's what makes your blood run cold. The pricing structure is laid out with the precision of a modern corporation. Murder someone, that'll be 25 gold florins for forgiveness. Adultery, a bargain at 6 florins. Want to commit any sin you like for the next year without consequence. Premium package, 100 florins. And we'll throw in a blessing for your business ventures. The most chilling part, there's a separate price list for different social classes. A peasant pays one rate for murdering his neighbor, while a nobleman pays 5 times as much for the same crime. Not because murder is worse when rich people do it, but because the church knew they could afford more. You can practically hear the coins clinking as you read Johann Tetzel's sales reports. This Dominican friar, Leo's star salesman, boasted that he could sell forgiveness for sins not yet committed. His famous jingle, as soon as the coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs. Tetzel's correspondence, preserved in these archives, reveals a man who understood his product perfectly. In one letter to Rome, he writes, "I've discovered that grief sells better than hope. When I describe the agonies their dead relatives suffer in purgatory, they empty their purses with tears in their eyes. It's almost too easy. But wait, it gets darker. You're now a typical German peasant in 1517, and you've just spent your family's food money on an indulgence for your deceased mother. You believe you've shortened her suffering in purgatory by decades. The paper in your calloused hands feels sacred, blessed by the Pope himself. What you don't know is that your money isn't going to help souls. It's funding the Pope's lavish lifestyle and his war against rival Italian city-states. You've traded your family's next meal for a piece of paper that your own priest suspects is worthless." The archives contain evidence that many church officials privately questioned the theology of indulgences. Cardinal Cajetan wrote to Pope Leo, "We risk making God's mercy into a commodity and turning his churches into marketplaces. How is this different from what Christ cast out of the temple?" Leo's response: he promoted Cajetan to a more lucrative position in Rome, far from the German territories where his conscience might cause problems. This is the second dark secret. The Catholic Church has always known the difference between spiritual truth and profitable fiction. The sale of indulgences wasn't a theological error. It was a calculated business decision that treated human fear as a renewable resource. The document before you is written in Cardinal Giovanni da Medici's own hand, the future Pope Leo X, and it details a conspiracy so breathtaking that it reads like fiction. Except it's not fiction. It's a You're now young Cardinal Medici in 1492. And you've just purchased your red hat from Pope Alexander VI. Yes, purchased it with enough gold to fund a small army. The going rate for a cardinal's position, 10,000 ducats, roughly equivalent to $2 million today. But that's just the entrance fee to the most exclusive club in Christendom. The air in your luxurious Roman palazzo smells like expensive wine and political ambition. You're hosting a dinner party where you'll casually discuss which bishoprics are coming up for sale and who's offering the highest bribes. Your guests include other cardinals who've bought their way to power, and the conversation flows as smoothly as the imported French wine. "Pass the salt," requests Cardinal Cornaro, "and tell me, how much did you pay for that lovely monastery in Bologna?" This isn't scandalous dinner conversation. It's normal business for the papal court. The archives contain detailed account books showing that literally every significant church position was for sale. Want to be Archbishop of Milan? Better bring 30,000 ducats. Interested in a German abbey? We'll cut you a deal at 15,000. But here's where it gets truly sinister. You discover that Pope Alexander VI, the infamous Borgia Pope, wasn't just selling church positions. He was selling absolution for crimes not yet committed. The archives contain what can only be called murder licenses, documents granting forgiveness for specific assassinations in exchange for political favors. One document, sealed with the papal ring, grants Cardinal Cesare Borgia, the Pope's son, yes, his son, forgiveness for any deaths that may occur during the pacification of the Romagna region. The date, 3 months before Cesare's brutal campaign that left hundreds dead. You can almost feel the weight of that seal in your hands, can't you? The physical representation of divine authority being used to pre-approve mass murder for political gain. Now imagine you're a rival cardinal who's discovered these documents. You wake up each morning knowing that the man claiming to represent Christ on earth has essentially issued hunting licenses for human beings. You dress carefully, wondering if you'll live to see sunset, because crossing the Borgias means risking a dinner invitation where the wine might be seasoned with something more deadly than herbs. The psychological records, yes, they kept those too, reveal something even more chilling. Pope Alexander VI didn't see any contradiction between his role as spiritual leader and his activities as a Renaissance crime boss. In his private diary he writes, "God gave me the keys to heaven and earth. If I cannot use earthly power to secure heavenly authority, what use are the keys?" This moral flexibility extended to his family life. The archives contain love letters between the Pope and his mistress, Julia Fornice, where he discusses their children's future careers in the church. Not spiritual careers, political ones. He's literally planning to install his offspring in positions of religious authority, treating the church like a family business. One letter is particularly revealing. "My dearest Julia, young Juan shows promise for the military, while Cesare has the cunning for politics. As for Lucrezia, we'll find her a husband who can extend our influence into new territories." The church needs leaders who understand that divine will and family interests are often the same thing. But perhaps the most disturbing document is a theological treatise written by Pope Alexander VI himself, defending the concept of necessary sins. In this twisted logic he argues that certain immoral acts become moral when committed for the greater good of the church. If Abraham was willing to sacrifice his son for God, the Pope writes, "Surely I can sacrifice the lives of a few rebels to preserve the institution through which God speaks to the world. The blood on my hands is sanctified by the souls I save through political stability." This is the third dark secret. The Vatican Archives prove that some of history's most powerful religious leaders saw themselves not as servants of God, but as God's business partners, with full license to rewrite morality when it suited their purposes. Your hands tremble as you open a war chest that's been sealed for over 7 centuries. Inside, you find documents that rewrite everything you thought you knew about the Crusades. The parchment smells like smoke and dried blood. And for good reason. These papers authorized some of the most brutal campaigns in human history. But forget everything you learned in school about holy wars against Muslims. You're looking at something far more sinister. Detailed plans for the Albigensian Crusade, where the Catholic Church declared war on fellow Christians whose only crime was reading the Bible for themselves. You wake up as Pope Innocent III in 1208, and you've got a problem. In the south of France, a growing number of Christians are asking uncomfortable questions. They're reading the Gospels and wondering why church leaders live in golden palaces while Christ preached poverty. They're called Cathars, and they're making the rest of your flock restless. The morning air in your papal apartments carries the scent of expensive incense, but it can't mask the smell of fear. Your advisors have brought you reports that entire towns are abandoning Catholic practices in favor of simpler, more biblical worship. If this spreads, your entire power structure collapses. So you reach for your papal seal and authorize something unprecedented. a crusade against Christians on Christian soil with the same spiritual rewards promised to those fighting in the Holy Land. The document you're holding is Pope Innocent III's actual call to arms, and the language is breathtaking in its cynicism. He offers not just forgiveness of sins, but complete ownership of any Catholic property seized during the campaign. It wasn't just a holy war, it was legalized theft wrapped in religious rhetoric. Take up the cross against these heretics, the Pope wrote to the nobles of northern France, and claim both heavenly rewards and earthly treasures. God wills that the faithful should prosper from the punishment of the unfaithful. But here's the most chilling detail. The archives contain the battle plans, and they read like a manual for genocide. The papal legate Arnaud Amalric issued specific instructions for dealing with captured towns. When asked how to distinguish between Catholics and Cathars during the siege of Béziers, his response became legendary: "Kill them all. God will know his own." The casualty reports, meticulously recorded by church officials, document the systematic extermination of entire communities. At Béziers alone, over 20,000 people were slaughtered in a single day. Men, women, children, and even Catholic priests who tried to protect their Cathar neighbors. You can almost hear the screams echoing through these pages, can't you? The cries of people dying not for any political threat they posed, but simply for believing that Christians should live like Christ. Now imagine you're a Cathar perfectus, a religious leader hiding in the fortress of Mons. You've spent months watching your community slowly starve while Catholic forces surround your mountain stronghold. The air is thin and cold, and you can smell the smoke from the siege engines below. You know that surrender means death. Not just death, but something worse. You'll be burned alive as a heretic, and your family will lose everything they've ever owned. Your children will be branded with the mark of heresy, making them social outcasts for life. The negotiations, recorded in painful detail in the archives, reveal the impossible choice the Cathars faced. The Catholic commanders offered them life if they would publicly renounce their beliefs and accept Catholic authority. The response: over 200 Cathars chose to burn rather than betray their conscience. The execution records make for grim reading. Church officials documented not just the names of those killed, but their exact words before death. Many Cathars spent their final moments singing hymns or reciting scriptures. One woman, Esclarmonde de Foix, reportedly told her executioners, "You can burn our bodies, but our example will burn in the hearts of those who seek truth." She was right. The brutality of the Albigensian Crusade shocked even medieval Europe, but the most damning evidence comes from the Church's own records. Private correspondence between papal officials reveals that they knew the Cathars posed no military threat. Their crime was theological competition. Cardinal Guy Falking wrote to Pope Innocent III, "These heretics live more like the apostles than many of our own clergy. Their poverty and piety make our wealth and corruption appear sinful by comparison. If we cannot reform the Church, we must eliminate the reformer." This is the fourth dark secret. The Vatican Archives prove that the Church has used holy war not just against foreign enemies, but against Christians whose faith made church corruption look indefensible. Some crusades weren't about spreading Christianity. They were about protecting Christian leaders from Christian. You're now holding documents that feel like they're radiating evil. And there's a good reason for that sensation. These papers document one of the most morally bankrupt deals in human history: the Vatican's Concordat with Nazi Germany. The year is 1933. And you wake up as Cardinal Eugenio Pacelli, the future Pope Pius XII. Outside your window in Vatican City, you can hear the distant sounds of Rome, but your attention is focused on the man sitting across from your desk, Franz von Papen, Hitler's vice-chancellor, who's come with an offer you can't refuse. The air in your office smells like leather-bound books and nervous sweat. Von Papen is proposing a deal that will secure the Catholic Church's position in Germany, but the price is silence about what the Nazis plan to do to Jews. communists and other undesirables. The actual Concordat, signed on July 20, 1933, is preserved in the Vatican Archives, and reading it today feels like watching someone sell their soul in real time in exchange for protecting Catholic schools and church property in Germany. The Vatican agreed to order German bishops to swear loyalty to the Nazi state. But that's just what made it into the public document. The secret protocols revealed decades later show the full extent of the Church's moral compromise. The Vatican agreed to remain neutral in any future war, even if that war involved the systematic murder of innocent people. Now picture yourself as a German Catholic bishop in 1933, receiving orders from Rome to cooperate with the Nazi regime. You wake up knowing that the brown-shirted thugs breaking Jewish shop windows are the same men your Vatican superiors have ordered you to support. The morning mass wine tastes like ashes in your mouth. Your hands shake as you read Cardinal Pacelli's directive. The Holy See has reached an understanding with the German government that serves the interests of both church and state. Local clergy are instructed to maintain cordial relations with civil authorities and refrain from political commentary that might disturb this harmony. Translation: shut up about the atrocities or lose your job. The archives contain hundreds of reports from German priests describing the moral agony of this position. Father Bernhard Lichtenberg wrote to Rome, "Every Sunday I watch SS officers attend Mass while wearing uniforms stained with the blood of innocents. They kneel for communion after spending their week terrorizing Jewish families. How can I give them the body of Christ while they're devouring the bodies of his people?" The Vatican's response: Father Lichtenberg was quietly transferred to a remote parish and warned to focus on spiritual matters rather than political ones. But the most damning evidence comes from the Pope's own correspondence with Hitler. Yes, they wrote to each other, and yes, the Vatican kept copies. In one letter from 1936, Pope Pius XI thanks the Führer for his dedication to Christian values and expresses hope for continued cooperation. This is the same year that Hitler's government began systematically stripping Jews of their citizenship and property. The same year that concentration camps expanded from political prisoners to include anyone the Nazis deemed racially inferior. The Vatican knew they had to know. The archives contain detailed intelligence reports from Catholic clergy throughout Germany, documenting the persecution of Jews with painful precision. Priests were sending Rome exact casualty figures, descriptions of transport trains, and first-hand accounts of violence against innocent families. One report from Father Anton Müller in Munich reads like a preview of the Holocaust. The situation for Jewish families grows more desperate daily. They are forbidden to work, forbidden to shop except during restricted hours, and forbidden to use public transportation. Their children have been expelled from schools. It's clear that the government intends to make life so unbearable that Jews will either flee the country or face complete destruction. The date on this report: 1938, 4 years before the Wannsee Conference that officially authorized the final solution. So what did Pope Pius XII do with this information? He filed it away and continued diplomatic relations with Nazi Germany. When World War II began, the Vatican maintained strict neutrality, even as reports flooded in about mass murder in occupied territories. The most heartbreaking documents are the pleas for help from Catholic Jews, people who had converted to Christianity but were still being targeted by racial laws. They wrote to the Pope begging for protection, for public condemnation of their persecution, for any sign that the Church would defend them. Edith Stein, a Jewish philosopher who became a Catholic nun, wrote directly to Pope Pius XI, "Holy Father, as a child of the Jewish people who by God's grace has been a child of the Catholic Church for 11 years, I make bold to speak to the Father of Christianity about that which oppresses millions of Germans. For weeks we have seen deeds perpetrated in Germany which mock any sense of justice and humanity. Is this campaign of revenge against the Jews not an insult to the most sacred humanity of our Savior? Sister Stein was murdered at Auschwitz and the Vatican canonized her as a saint in 1998, praising her courage in speaking truth to power. The irony would be funny if it weren't so tragic. This is the fifth dark secret. The Vatican Archives prove that the Catholic Church prioritized institutional survival over moral leadership when faced with humanity's darkest hour. They had detailed knowledge of Nazi atrocities and chose silence over salvation. You're now rifling through financial records that read like a crime thriller. Except the criminals wear crosses instead of ski masks. The numbers on these pages represent billions of dollars that flowed through the Vatican's financial system, and much of it was blood money. The year is 1943, and you wake up as Pope Pius XII. But instead of morning prayers, you're reviewing balance sheets from the Vatican Bank, officially called the Institute for the Works of Religion. A name so innocuous it practically screams money laundering operation. The morning light streaming through your papal apartment windows illuminates documents that would make a mafia accountant blush. Your bank isn't just handling donations from faithful Catholics. It's washing gold stolen from Holocaust victims, hiding Nazi treasure, and financing escape routes for war criminals. The air smells like old money and older sins, and both scents are accurate. In your hands you hold deposit slips for Croatian gold that arrived in Vatican vaults while Croatian fascists were murdering hundreds of thousands of Serbs, Jews, and Roma. The timing isn't coincidental. Ante Pavelić, the fascist leader of Croatia's puppet state, was depositing looted treasure in Vatican accounts even as his Ustasha death squads were committing genocide. The archives contain his actual banking records showing regular transfers of gold, silver, and foreign currency to accounts controlled by Vatican officials. But here's what makes your blood run cold. The Vatican knew exactly where this money came from. Intelligence reports filed neatly in these archives describe the systematic robbery of Jewish families, the melting down of religious artifacts, and the sale of property seized from murder victims. One report from Bishop Aloysius Stepinac details the Croatian government's collection efforts. The state has liquidated Jewish property with remarkable efficiency. Gold teeth, jewelry, and household valuables are being processed through central collection points before transfer to Allied institutions abroad. Allied institutions abroad, Vatican speak for, we're helping them hide the evidence. Now imagine you're a Jewish family in Zagreb and you wake up to jackbooted soldiers breaking down your door, and by nightfall your family's savings, your grandmother's wedding ring, and your children's inheritance are sitting in a Vatican vault beneath St. Peter's Basilica. The most damning evidence comes from Operation Bernhard, the Nazi counterfeiting scheme that flooded Europe with fake British pounds. The Vatican Bank accepted millions in counterfeit currency, claiming they couldn't tell the difference between real and forged bill. Either Vatican bankers were criminally incompetent, or they were knowingly helping the Nazis destabilize Allied economies. Archbishop Giovanni Montini, later Pope Paul VI, wrote to his superiors, "The provenance of certain deposits raises questions that perhaps we should not ask too closely. Our primary concern must be the financial stability of the Holy See during these uncertain times." Translation: don't ask where the money came from, just count it. But the Vatican's financial crimes didn't end with World War. The archives document the infamous rat line operations, escape networks that helped Nazi war criminals flee to South America using Vatican diplomatic passports and church funds. You're now Adolf Eichmann in 1950, waking up in a monastery outside Rome. A Catholic bishop has just handed you a new identity, Ricardo Clement, and a Vatican passport that will get you safely to Argentina. The same church that remained silent while you organized the Holocaust is now ensuring you'll never face justice. The financial records are explicit. The Vatican spent millions helping war criminals escape prosecution. Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Leon, Franz Stangl, commandant of Treblinka, and hundreds of other mass murderers received Vatican assistance in starting new lives in South America. The justification recorded in internal church documents was pathetically weak. Christian mercy requires us to help all souls seek redemption regardless of their past actions. Apparently, mercy for murderers was more important than justice for victims. Archbishop Aloysius Monk wrote to Vatican Secretary of State Cardinal Tardini, "These men may have committed grave errors during the war, but forcing them to face vengeful courts serves no Christian purpose. Better to allow them to live quietly and perhaps find peace with God in distant lands." Grave errors. That's how the Vatican described genocide. The money trail gets even darker when you follow Vatican investments during the Cold War. The Church was simultaneously funding anti-communist operations in Eastern Europe while investing in companies that profited from apartheid in South Africa and military dictatorships in Latin America. Vatican Bank records show massive investments in Italian arms manufacturers during the 1970s when those same weapons were being used to suppress democracy movements worldwide. The Church was literally profiting from the tools of oppression while preaching about human dignity. Bishop Paul Marcinkus, who ran the Vatican Bank for decades, summed up the institution's philosophy perfectly. "You can't run the Church on Hail Marys." True enough. But apparently you can run it on blood money, stolen gold, and war criminal protection scheme. This is the sixth dark secret. The Vatican Archives prove that the Catholic Church has operated one of history's most successful money laundering operations, washing the blood off dirty money and transforming genocide profits into holy investment. You're descending into the deepest, darkest section of the Vatican Archives, where the air itself seems to scream with the agony of centuries past. The documents you're about to examine detail the systematic torture, murder, and psychological destruction of human beings, all carried out in the name of God. Welcome to the archives of the Roman Inquisition, where faith was enforced with red-hot irons and truth was extracted with thumbscrews. The year is 1542, and you wake up as Pope Paul III, signing the papal bull that officially establishes the Roman Inquisition. Outside your window, Rome is buzzing with Renaissance energy, but you're more concerned with crushing the Protestant Reformation than celebrating human achievement. The morning air carries the scent of burning wood from the breakfast fires, but soon it will carry a different kind of smoke, the kind that rises from human flesh. You reach for your papal seal, about to authorize an institution that will torture and murder in your name for the next 3 centuries. The founding documents of the Inquisition read like a manual for totalitarian control. The Pope granted inquisitors unlimited authority to arrest, interrogate, and execute anyone suspected of heresy. No evidence was required for arrest, mere accusation was enough. No lawyers were permitted for the defense. The accused faced their torturers alone. But here's what makes these documents truly chilling. They weren't written by sadistic madmen, but by intelligent, educated men who believed they were serving God. The logical precision with which they planned human suffering is more terrifying than any random act of violence. Cardinal Giovanni Carafa, the first Grand Inquisitor, wrote detailed instructions for extracting confessions. Pain applied with patience and precision will open the most stubborn heart to divine truth. A heretic who suffers for his errors may yet achieve salvation through agony. Now imagine you're Giordano Bruno in 1593, waking up in an Inquisition cell after 6 years of imprisonment. Your crime? Teaching that the earth orbits the sun and that the universe contains infinite worlds. The stone walls around you are stained with the blood of previous prisoners, and you know your turn is coming. The interrogation records of Bruno's trial are preserved in these archives, and they document 8 years of systematic torture designed to break his spirit. Inquisitors used every technique in their arsenal: the strappado, which dislocated shoulders, the rack, which stretched victims until joints separated, and waterboarding, which the church called questioning by water. Between torture sessions, Bruno was kept in solitary confinement in a cell so small he couldn't lie down. His meals consisted of bread and water delivered just often enough to keep him alive for the next interrogation. The psychological warfare was as brutal as the physical torture. Cardinal Robert Bellarmine visited Bruno personally, offering him freedom if he would publicly recant his scientific beliefs. The conversation recorded by a court scribe reveals the twisted logic of the Inquisition. "You need only speak a few words," Bellarmine urged, "and this suffering ends. Say that the earth stands still, that the stars are fixed in their spheres, and you may return to your studies." Bruno's response: "I cannot and will not recant what I know to be true. You may burn my body, but you cannot burn the truth I have discovered." So they burned him. On February 17, 1600, Giordano Bruno was tied to a stake in Rome's Campo de' Fiori and roasted alive while church officials watched from nearby balconies. His last words, according to witnesses, were, "Perhaps you who condemn me fear me more than I fear you." The execution records note that Bruno's books were burned alongside his body, and his name was ordered erased from all university records. The church was trying to murder not just a man but the ideas he represented. But Bruno was just one victim among thousands. The Inquisition archives contain detailed records of torture sessions, complete with sketches of devices and step-by-step instructions for their use. Reading these documents is like touring a medieval chamber of horrors designed by The Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches, provided inquisitors with a comprehensive guide to identifying, torturing, and executing suspected witches. The book's logic was circular and inescapable. If a woman confessed to witchcraft under torture, she was guilty. If she refused to confess, her resistance proved she was in league with Satan. Water torture was considered especially effective for female suspects. Women were stripped naked, bound to tables, and forced to swallow gallons of water until their stomachs distended. Then inquisitors would jump on their swollen bellies, causing agonizing pain and often internal injury. The justification recorded in official church documents was that Satan gave witches supernatural resistance to pain, so extra suffering was necessary to overcome demonic protection. It was the perfect system. The more innocent the victim, the more torture was required to prove their guilt. Sister Maria de Jesus, a Spanish nun accused of having visions that contradicted church doctrine, spent 3 years in Inquisition custody. Her interrogation records describe forced sleep deprivation, sexual humiliation, and psychological abuse designed to convince her that her religious experiences were demonic delusion. The accused claims that Christ appeared to her in prayer, wrote Inquisitor Francisco Peña, but her description of the Savior differs from approved iconography. Either she lies about her visions or Satan has deceived her with false appearance. In either case, correction through suffering is required. Sister Maria eventually confessed to whatever her torturers demanded, but by then her mind had shattered. She spent her remaining years in an asylum, rocking back and forth and whispering prayers to a God who had abandoned her to his earthly representatives. The most disturbing aspect of these records isn't the torture itself, it's the bureaucratic efficiency with which it was administered. The Inquisition kept detailed budgets for torture equipment, maintenance schedules for instruments of pain, and performance reviews for torturers. One account book lists the cost of replacing worn thumb screws, 2 silver coins, sharpening iron spikes, 1 copper coin, and cleaning blood from interrogation chambers contracted to local women for a few bread loaves. Human suffering had been reduced to line items in a ledger. This is the 7th dark secret. The Vatican Archives prove that the Catholic Church created the most sophisticated torture apparatus in human history, complete with theological justifications for inflicting maximum pain, while keeping victims alive for extended suffering. You're now handling documents that feel radioactive with shame, papers that document the Catholic Church's systematic cover-up of child sexual abuse spanning centuries. These aren't recent scandals, they're evidence of an institutional culture that prioritized reputation over the safety of children. The year is 151, and you're reading the Liber Gregorianus, a letter written by St. Peter Damian to Pope Leo IX describing widespread sexual abuse of children by Catholic clergy. This isn't some modern problem that caught the Church off guard. They've known about clerical pedophilia for nearly 1,000 years. You wake up as Pope Leo IX in the morning light illuminating your papal apartments can't brighten the darkness of what you're reading. St. Peter Damian isn't just reporting isolated incidents. He's describing a culture of abuse so pervasive that it threatens the very foundations of church authority. The air in your chambers smells like parchment and fear as you read Damian's precise documentation. Clergy who fall into this vice not only defile themselves, but corrupt the young souls entrusted to their spiritual care. Some religious superiors not only fail to correct this behavior but participate in it themselves. Damian begged Pope Leo to take decisive action. This cancer must be cut from the body of the Church before it spreads further. Those who abuse children should be stripped of holy orders and handed over to secular authorities for punishment. The Pope's response: he thanked Damian for his concern but took no meaningful action. The culture of cover-up began nearly a millennium ago. Fast forward to 1568 and you're Cardinal Charles Borromeo conducting secret investigations into abuse scandals in northern Italy. Your private correspondence preserved in these archives reveals a pattern that would become tragically familiar. Identify the problem, transfer the perpetrator, threaten victims with excommunication if they speak publicly. Father Angelo